the permafrost carbon to be transferred into grassy plains stored carbon. It seems like it's a really great idea.
It really does.
But there is also a problem. So it's been tundra for the last 5 to 10,000 years. Animals have now adapted to a new ecosystem. They've made their homes there. The world has moved on. Animals have moved on. The ecosystem has moved on. Bringing back a mammoth in 160 kilometres squared, how many can you support in that region? How do you know they wouldn't wander off? What specifically did they eat? Would there be enough space for them? Ecologically, there are a few issues. There's nothing to hunt them anymore. And it's seen in Africa, if you have too many elephants in a very specific area of a reserve, they trash the forests. They flatten regions because they're meant to be spread out over a huge area. So a very low density. Whereas if you put them into very high densities, they can completely disrupt things. This could also occur with the mammoth situation. Additionally, the behaviours will be that of an elephant, I guess. We don't know how the mammoth behaved. Being a mammal, the parents imprint on their babies. But these mammoths will have an elephant mum. Therefore, they will behave like elephants. So the genetics won't quite be a mammoth. The behaviours won't quite be a mammoth. And no one is there to teach them how to be a mammoth because we don't know how mammoths behaved.
But will it be enough? Will it be close enough? We don't know.
I can only shrug my shoulders. That's the only thing. I can only shrug my shoulders here. And yeah, the other issue is ethically, an elephant is an incredibly intelligent animal. Extremely intelligent. And putting it through the stress of giving birth and perhaps having to nurture something which is an alien species.
You might not want to.
It would incredibly large amounts of stress. Imagine a study in which a human would have to give birth to Neanderthal.
That's an interesting thought experiment because I'm talking about that later.
Cool. Literally.
Get thinking about bringing back Neanderthals.
Yeah, so that's the kind of... It has a lot of really just finicky, actually, when you think about it, really quite large issues that arise.
But it could potentially have massive benefits as well. It's very much high risk, high reward, it sounds like.
Yeah, and... exactly that. And I think in conclusion to the whole mammoth, should we bring them back or not, well, the scientific implication is very cool. I would love to see one. It would be the most extraordinary thing to see a 3.5, 4 metre tall, hairy elephant wandering around some grassy plains. But in the words of Dr. Ian Malcolm from Jurassic Park...
You're not quoting Jurassic Park.
Oh, I absolutely am. Scientists were so preoccupied with whether they could, they didn't stop to think if they should. And I think the excitement behind this, oh wow, we could probably do this, is overriding, oh hang on, should we? Really? Is there a place for them anymore?
I think there's a strong case still.
True. I mean, ethical implications are massive. If the best case, everything goes right, we have to mentally and most likely physically hurt a very sentient and very threatened animal of the elephant, which isn't amazing. And we have a high-tech Tundra Be Gone device. That's the best case scenario. Worst case scenario, something will go ecologically catastrophically wrong. We have the destruction of a huge amount of tundra and the permafrost beneath it. When the tundra goes, the permafrost goes. And if that grassy plains don't move fast enough and take up that carbon fast enough, we have just accelerated vast amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Animals will be displaced, not just macrofauna, but insects, arthropods that have now grown to live in the tundra regions. The tundra will go. So you'll be looking at perhaps extinction of arthropods and microfauna, which kind of keep an ecosystem glued together. Also, we're guessing. Finally, we are guessing and filling in the gaps for the most part of how they behave and what they'd look like. So in terms of the genetics and what the genetics looks like. So we're not bringing back a mammoth species, we're bringing back our interpretation of a mammoth species.
I see, yeah.
One existing without preconception. And if you have to start changing things, you've got all the evidence that science has given you, and you have to start changing things and start guessing and filling in gaps to what you think a mammoth might be, because it needs that. Where do you stop? At the end of the day, you've just, it's like, you've genetically engineered what you think a mammoth is, and that's it.
And it's not going to stop there, is it?
It's not going to stop there. And that's the end of the mammoth saga.
That's a really strong argument on both sides.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's why it's such a contended issue at the moment, where no one really knows should they or shouldn't they. You make up your minds. You make up your minds on that one. So, my second part, the bit that sometimes annoys me, but I wish was also a thing that could actually happen. Bringing back dinosaurs. Jurassic Park. I mentioned it to Dr. Ian Malcolm a minute ago, one of the characters from Jurassic Park, and I think that's an excellent segue into why Tom looks into bringing back dinosaurs is impossible and also a bad idea.
Are you saying that?
That is...
You love dinosaurs.
I know, and it's...
You literally have a Lego dinosaur behind you right this moment.
I do. It's a very... Yeah, it's a good T-Rex. The issue is, I would like it to happen, but the science, spoiler alert, is very much swinging one way. But let's go through it. Dinosaurs are not extinct. Birds, all birds, are a member of a group called theropods. There's some famous relatives, such as T-Rex and Velociraptor. So dinosaurs still exist. A small proportion of them did get through.
Question. Are crocodiles dinosaurs?
Crocodiles are members of the Archosaur group, which includes crocodiles and dinosaurs. Crocodiles are not dinosaurs.
But they're related.
At the STEM level, yes. They're sister groups. So, in Jurassic Park, if you're not aware, the company called InGen and Dr. Henry Wu take blood from a mosquito preserved in amber from I can't remember which period of the dinosaurs. I think it was the Cretaceous, possibly the Jurassic.
This is all fictional, right? A fictional example.
This is from Jurassic Park. This is all fictional. Just before we go any further, all fictional. Also, I hope this mosquito was a female, because the male ones eat nectar and fruit juice, which would be a slight anticlimax in terms of...
blood.
Blood, yes. So, they extracted the blood from this mosquito trapped in amber. That had obviously feasted on a dinosaur at some point in its life. They break up the blood cells via centrifuge, spinning it extremely fast, and extract the DNA from that via polymerase chain reaction, which is a fancy term for copying DNA.
Amplifying it, yeah.
Amplifying it. You get a strand and you can create many, many, many strands of exactly the same type. Via that, they multiply it, then they clone those bits of DNA and put it into bacteria.
Up to this point, this is all stuff I've done myself in the lab, so all this is pretty, reasonable.
When Jurassic Park came out originally as a book, a lot of paleontologists, a lot of scientists looked immediately to go and rip it to pieces, but Michael Crichton, the author, did an exceptional job at looking at the science, and in terms of the science, it's pretty legit. So you can't really fault him on that. So yeah, they put it into bacteria. These can then be used as self-dividing DNA transporters, basically.
Yeah, so a plasmid is basically a ring of DNA that's separate from the normal DNA that you have in your nucleus. And bacteria, I'm sure you know, divide very quickly. So if you stick a fragment of a piece of DNA that you want to use or look at more and put that into a plasmid and then put that plasmid into a bacteria, you can make lots and lots.
There you go. Perfect. That's saying it far better than I ever could. Then you inject this DNA into a frog egg, removing
I have not done that before.
Frog DNA first. Like the whole mammoth situation, you would inject that piece of dinosaur DNA into the egg of a frog after removing the frog genetics. Then you'd kickstart the development, and then the development which then ensues is that of a dinosaur, not of a frog. It won't form into frog spawn, but it will develop as a dinosaur would have done, and a hard shell would then develop. I believe in the films they actually put them into ostrich eggs, but then you let it develop, keep it going, happy hatching day occurs. And in the world of Jurassic Park, they specifically coded them all to be female so they couldn't reproduce. But you have yourself a dinosaur. The science works. I
mean, I have questions, but I can see where they're coming from. I mean, the whole purpose. So when you've amplified your DNA through polymerase chain reaction, so you've got lots of the fragment, purpose and then putting it in so I've only done this with fragments of DNA, so kind of genes I'm interested in. The whole point in putting it into the bacteria to divide a lot is to make sure you do have the same fragment, because when you're making lots of things, amplifying lots of bits of DNA through PCR, there are ways you can kind of distinguish that you've got the right fragment. But if the fragments are very similar in size or that sort of thing, you need to know that you're getting the same one if you're going to do anything with it. So when a bacteria divides, you get a little colony, a little circle, and you know they're all going to be the same. Doing it for an entire dinosaur genome, I mean, maybe that is a way. This is outside my remit, so that's how I see this.
In theory, it should technically work. But with a mammoth, I think I've mentioned this a little bit before as well. With a mammoth, we've extracted the DNA from 10,000 years ago. We've even extracted DNA from a 700,000-year-old horse. But, as I said before, DNA is fickle. It's delicate. Every chance it gets, it will dissolve, unless frozen instantly in ice. But it's not something that lasts several thousand years necessarily, normally, out in the open, let alone tens or hundreds of millions of years. Needless to say, we don't have any DNA of dinosaurs. Biological tissues decay. We found mosquitoes with blood cells in them, but there's nothing to them. There's no DNA left. It's all decayed. The only ones that really stick around are chitin, which is kind of beetle carapace, what you'd get on a beetle exoskeleton. Melanosomes, or melanin, which you'd find in colorations of feathers. You can kind of detect them in the fossilized feathers of other dinosaurs, so you can see what colors they were. And lignin, which is in wood. They're the only biological tissues that really hang around. But we have found blood. We do have dinosaur blood. In 1997, Mary Schweitzer in her lab in Montana State University found an exceptionally well-preserved dinosaur bone. They didn't know what the dinosaur was, but it was very well preserved, to the extent that they found tubules and vessels within the structure itself, and also little rust flecks throughout. These rust flecks were hemoglobin, were blood cells.
That must be an exciting fact.
There's an incredible book called The Dinosaurs Rediscovered, How a Scientific Revolution is Rewriting History, by Michael J. Benton. And in that, he really describes this process in great detail, and also what they did in the lab. And it's quite incredible, the reaction that everyone had. They were shouting and for joy in the middle of a science lab. It must have been electric. Wow. It must have been incredible. So they dissolved the calcium phosphate of the bone, which makes up the hard bit, and what left was collagen, the second bit of a bone. This is the kind of flexible stuff.
I really wish I could have seen that moment. I mean, if something small we managed to get right in the lab happens as lots of girly screaming, so I can't imagine what the energy must have been like then.
They found actual dinosaur, fossilized dinosaur blood. So yeah, they dissolved the bone down, and what they were left with was the cartilaginous material and potential vessels containing blood proteins. And after a lot of backwards and forwards, it was only settled actually a few years ago what it is, but it was thought to be an artifact. It was then thought to be these vessels were nothing but bacterial films that had basically dissolved the original vessels and taken over, and as they were being fossilized. In 2015, more dinosaur red blood cells were found in Cretaceous animals. In 2017, some of the proteins from the original one in 1997, turns out they were from ostriches. But that's only because it is a potential contamination, because in the same lab they were dealing with both modern and prehistoric animals, and what this contamination could have been.
Well, that makes me feel a lot better, because that is something that does happen.
It does
I'm very
happen.
early career though, so that's why.
Just put my hand up. It's fine.
And it hasn't been recent. It was a while ago.
But also from this incident, now prehistoric genetics takes place in one lab, and everything else takes place in a different lab. And if you are investigating prehistoric genetics, that then gets sent to another lab where it's also tested again in exactly the same methodology to make sure that you didn't have any contamination in your lab. And then if necessary, it's also sent to a third lab to do exactly the same experiment to make sure there's no contamination in the second and first labs.
That's fantastic.
So I don't know if you see that in the labs today, but extremely large amounts of lab security and biosecurity.
I think as well, because the stuff I mainly do, it's stuff that is extant and is in kind of great supply in nature.